Hi, this is an MLA format sheet based on the 8th edition of the MLA Handbook. Let me begin with a disclaimer. Obviously, when you move from an entire book to a single sheet of paper, 2 sides, you don't get everything. So in any questions, in any debates, or any uncertainty, it's always best to go to the MLA Handbook itself. However, for many students, what I have on these 2 pages will cover a vast amount of what you actually need to know to successfully document an essay in MLA format. Now, MLA format has 2 sides, thus 2 sheets. The first part is the parenthetical in-text documentation. That's the part that goes in your essay as you paraphrase or quote material. When you paraphrase, which is to take somebody else's words, change them into your own, what I call a translation, like going from English to German, that's a paraphrase. Or a direct quotation, that's where you take the literal exact words of the original source and you repeat them in your essay. In both situations, you must provide documentation. In an MLA, we call it an in-text parenthetical citation. This is usually made up of 2 things. The authority, and please note I use the word authority as a more general word. Now, authority might be the last name of the author, or authors plural. But it could also be the title of the text if there is no listed author. The second thing is the page number on which the particular paraphrase or quotation comes from, if available. And certainly nowadays, often there is no page number to use. There are 2 options as to how this parenthetical citation can be done, and you do not have to do it the same way every time. The first option, and frankly my preferred option, is what I call the bookend. The bookend citation is when you introduce the quotation or paraphrase with the author's name, and at the end of the borrowed material you provide the page number. Those are the bookends, author on one side, page number at the other side. Note that the period, when you do this, goes outside the closed parentheses. So you see this first example. According to Dr. John Singer, comma, quote, the obesity rate in this country is due to too much fat in our diets and too little exercise, end quote, parentheses, 72, parentheses, period at the end. You also note, please, there is no abbreviation in front of the page number. It doesn't say P period or PG period or anything else like that. This is because in MLA we know that this is going to be a page number by definition. The bookend technique is particularly effective for use with paraphrases that are more than 1 sentence long. If your source lacks pagination, lead off with a reference to the text, and then put the authority, which is the author or the title, in the parentheses. So here's an example. According to an article found on the website medicine.net. Now please note, saying medicine.net is actually not sufficient documentation in MLA format. This just names the website, but it is very clear to a reader that at this point we are getting borrowed material. People suffering from anorexia or bulimia have distorted images of their own body, parentheses, Dryden Edwards, and Stopler, parentheses, period. There's no quotation mark, right? Because it's a paraphrase. The second option, option number 2, is the back end. It is perhaps the most common way to document a paraphrase or direct quotation, and it's actually very, very simple. You just put the author and page number in the parentheses at the end of the quotation or paraphrase. So here we see in the United States today, obesity is the second most significant cause of death. Singer 78, in parentheses with the period at the end. In bold, so I guess it must be important. It is important to note that you're only allowed a 1-sentence paraphrase if you use the back-end technique. Number 2, if your paraphrase is more than one sentence, option number 1 must be used. This prevents you from the sin of what I call tagging. Tagging is when you have an extensive paraphrase and then you have the back-end documentation. But the problem is when you do a back-end documentation, the reader doesn't know how much of what you wrote is actual paraphrase or not. Because unlike with quotations, there are no signifiers, there are no quotation marks to indicate the beginning and the end. Now, of course, things happen. One thing that happens is many sources have no stated author. Often a source will have no author. Such sources could include anonymous articles, movies, and television programs. In this case, documentation will be the title of the work. For a magazine article, this would be the title of the article, in quotation marks, not the name of the magazine. This is a common mistake a lot of my students make, is to name the magazine or newspaper or journal rather than the title of the article. So here's an example. Quote, children who have daycare experience are often better socialized and work better independently than those who haven't, end quote. Then there's parentheses. Then there's a quotation, daycare, decade. Then there's a second quotation mark, A4, parentheses, period. You can tell that this is an article title because, of course, in MLA, article titles are put in quotation marks. Small works in quotation marks. A4 is a page number, probably a newspaper, because newspapers do that section letter and then page number system. Another example, this concept is demonstrated in one famous film line, colon, quote, there's no trick to making money if money is what you want, end quote. This is from a movie called Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane, being a movie, is italicized. Period at the end here, outside the quotation marks. Of course, many sources will not have page numbers. These include sources from the internet, interviews that you may conduct, whether in person, by telephone, email, Skype, or some other medium, movies, television programs, and other such things. In fact, it might be the case nowadays that more of your sources will not have page numbers than will. Here's an example. One internet source cited Barry Jenkins as the best new director of this decade, styling. So all you have is the author's name, right? That one source right there. Now, one of the things that happens frequently, especially when you start digging more deeply into research, is that you'll find that authors tend to specialize. And so it is very common to see multiple works by the same author. What do you do when you have that? Because if you only give the author's name, and then you go to the works cited page, you'll find multiple works and you don't know which one it is. When this happens, you must give a third piece of additional information, and that is the title. Provide the first words of the title, particularly after the words the, a, and, in addition to the author and page number. So here's an example. Another article by Dr. Bauer cites gang violence as rooted in lack of church, civic, or community involvement. The gangs of LA, okay, so you see here, this is the title, and then there's a page number there. So Dr. Bauer has obviously written more than one work, which I am citing, and so to distinguish one work from the other, I include a piece of the title. I do not have to give the entire title. I just need to give the beginning of the title, okay? Not the middle part, not the end part, because that won't tell us on the works cited page where it is. Of course, many works have multiple authors, 2, 3, 4, what have you. Now, in MLA, if there are just 2 authors, list both the authors with the word "and" in between. So here you see one book associates gang violence with accessibility of guns, Morrison and Becker, page 103. On the other hand, if you have 3 or more authors, okay? 3 or more authors. Then you're going to use a little Latin. We're going to get a little smart. Et al., which is an abbreviation for an expression in Latin that means and others. So you see this example. One source connects gang violence with economic distress. Brown et al. Then there's a little period, because that's actually an abbreviation, 87. Please note there's no comma here. All right, no comma there. So that's the first page of the MLA format guidelines. We're going to go to a new tape for the second page.